Hello, and thanks for joining us on Prime Politics. With just 14 days plus one to the elections, information about the process, the candidates, the umpire, voting, security, and much more is crucial. But it's also at times like this that false information, false reports, and fake news does the most damage. While media experts in the last few months have been looking for solutions to limit the spread of fake news, here on Prime Politics today, we take a look at the implication of all this on the electoral process. I am Ladi Akeredoluale.
Thanks, Ladi, and I'm Ijoma Onyato. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Now, misinformation, disinformation, or fake news sometimes refers to an honest mistake. But then sometimes information is deliberately wrong and spread tactically, specifically intended to cause confusion or to lead the target audience to believe a lie. Well, whichever way you look at it, fake news is a tactic information welfare tool, so they say. But how serious is this issue now that the polls are upon us? We have a live studio audience who will share their thoughts on the issue, so let's welcome our studio audience. A little bit louder. Yes, they're happy to be here. And of course, we have you at home following us online and real time. Now, the motivation for sharing misleading content and the actors who share it are very different. Now, to shed some light on this, we're being joined on Prime Politics today by the director of the International Press Institute, Mr. Lanre Arogundade, legal practitioner, Mr. Sonny Awonuga, as well as veteran and seasoned journalist, Ken Ugbeche. And also joining us from Abuja is the Director General of the National Orientation Agency, Dr. Garba Abari. We are also expecting the president of the Online Magazines Publishers Association of Nigeria, Mr. Ejiro Adigbo. We expect him to join us in the course of the discussion. Now, before we dive in, let's take a look, as we usually do, at some of the key issues to be highlighted by our correspondent, Olu Phillips.
Perhaps one of the greatest interruptions and boosts to the news industry is media convergence and influence of social media in disseminating news, in addition to traditional media. But no sooner has that become the celebrated bride, did it start posing a great degree of challenge to the industry. Fake news is no doubt one liability that has been brought on by multimedia channel. It's the concept or phenomenon of people using various platforms to pass on unverified and untrue stories of information. The New York Times describes fake news as a made-up story with an intention to deceive, often for a secondary gain, and is arguably one of the most serious challenges facing the news industry. Recently, the most prominent example of fake news is the reported influence it had on the US presidential elections in 2016 and Britain's referendum on Brexit, where social media platforms in particular were used to create and disseminate news which influenced voting patterns. If the comments by prominent Nigerians and government officials are to be believed, fake news have also arrived on the shores of Nigeria, especially ahead of the 2019 elections. There have been worries of its possible impact.
The capacity of fake news to cause alarm and fear and even fatal violence has been demonstrated again and again. One of the great worries should be, for us, what harm is done to public information. I think that the time may come, if nothing is done, when nothing will be believed or nothing will be believable.
However, there are those who also believe that the arguments about fake news are a method employed by the authorities to silence the media ahead of national elections. Increasingly, what we have seen are sources that are politically biased or inaccurate.
If governments are proactive, if agencies are proactive, if parastatals are proactive in putting out information in the public space, the chances of fake news gaining the ascendancy will be slightly reduced.
Whichever side of the argument one believes, if fake news is allowed to flourish or unchecked, it can have devastating consequences. Already, efforts are on to help the voting public identify fake news when they come across it.
This led us to start looking into interference around elections and how, again, we could help journalists in their own countries with elections looming, how we could maybe help them to increase the skills in the newsrooms to start to predict if any of this misinformation was actually deliberate and coordinated, but also to help the public understand what they're seeing on their own social networks, who can they turn to and who can they trust.
Now to the questions. What role can fake news play in Nigeria's electoral process? Who is likely to benefit from fake news? What's the difference between fake news and uncomfortable truth? What's the best means of combating uncomfortable truth when tagged fake news without impairing the freedom of expression and rights of the citizens? Are the public manifesting an unchecked appetite which might be feeding the sources of fake news? Is there a difference between fake news and biased reporting, or are they two sides of a coin? These and more questions we hope can be addressed in an elaborate discussion. Olu Phillips, Channels Television News.
Thank you. Welcome back to the program. Now, let's just dive into the discussion. We've had a lot of talk about it. And let me start with you, Mr. Uwichi. Let me just call you Ken. You're a journalist yourself. You heard from the Vice President, and he said there will come a time, there may come a time when nothing will be believed. And I've heard people say, you know, it depends on where you see the story. Perhaps it's content. Is it the content or is it the medium? So what constitutes fake news, and how can you notice it?
Well, let me start by putting it this way. You see, fake news is a deliberate act. And mind that word deliberate. It's deliberate, purposeful, consciously done by the person projecting it, either through broadcast medium or in writing. And with clear intent. That intent could be commercial, it could be political. These days, because of a resurgence, a preponderance in online media, and the popularity is gaining, people want to gain traction. People want to get traffic into their websites. And you look at the audience you want to address. What do they believe? Sensationalism? They say bad news sells. So somebody sits in his house, in a car, under a tree. Once you have a smartphone or a connected, or what I call a naval laptop, they concoct a story. The intent is clear, either to drive traffic to the website, or they have been paid by a particular political party to run down another political party. So in fake news, the intent is to distort, damage, and it's a deliberate intent.
Yeah, but I heard you talking about, you know, somebody doing it on a laptop. Is it only when it's on social media? Because even mainstream, those of us in mainstream,
I'm coming to that. Yeah. Because even the Vice President raised that concern. Because we in the conventional media are also being, we are frightened. Because they are encroaching, and you know, the thing flies faster. People believe the first information they get. So when there is a retraction or somehow a proper perspective of that event coming from the conventional media, they have already taken flight with the fake news and they are running with it. They are even sharing it. So what boosts it? What boosted fake news? You know, fake news has been with humanity from the 1st century. But new media now gave it like tonic, it's like fuel. It has been fueled by new media that anybody that has any smartphone at all can be part of the fake news community. And it's a booming industry now. Yeah, it's a booming industry in the sense that every day they recruit people. Those people they are recruiting don't even know the damage they are doing to the society. Because as far as they are concerned, they are enjoying themselves. Oh, so this man has been sleeping with this woman. That thing never happened. But somebody puts it on the website and pushes it out, and people are now sharing it. So you are rebroadcasting and directing more traffic. That person is making revenues through advert and through more traffic and more clicks to his or our website. So
what I can catch from you is that you are, as a mainstream journalist, you are frightened. Mr. Wonuga, are you frightened as a lawyer?
Well, I think the basic thing is that the respective professional bodies handling journalism and the like, with the greatest respect, they have not been up to their functions. Because unlike other professional bodies, for instance, doctors, engineers, lawyers, who get sanctioned randomly, it's a case of look before you leap, think before you act. But where there is no deterrent, of course, the coast is clear. You do this today, you can get away with it. You do this tomorrow, you can get away with it. Of course, and the beat goes on. If it's good for Moses, then it's good for the next man too. So the most important thing, and there are laws too, in respect of this. For instance, in Lagos State, for instance, under Section 39 of the Criminal Laws of Lagos State, I think the last one was 2011. I don't know whether there's an upgraded one for 2015. There's a law there, for instance, Section 35 to 39, for instance, talks about offenses pertaining to public disorder. The issue is not whether you believe it or not. The most important thing is the damage you have caused as a result. So it's immaterial for you to say, oh, I'm sorry, as at the time I disseminated that thing, I had good faith. I think what I was, no, it's a strict liability thing. The moment you have done it, you have done it. So if, for instance, let's assume, like I said, from the professional bodies, we don't hear anything. We just see these things handling, because it's just like...
so I know that is going to jump in. I'm going to take you up on that, because it's not like medicine where you say the professional bodies can sanction you in that kind of way. Yes. Somebody is in their garage, they have a laptop, they're not even part of mainstream media. They're not even registered. Yes. How do you then grab such a person? That's the challenge that journalism is facing. They are faceless people that you can't hold.
Sorry, with the greatest respect, that challenge doesn't exist. Now, there's this gentleman, I don't want to go into the merits of the case. I think he's a presidential aspirant now. It's a major person in whether Sarah reporters or something. I don't want to go into it. You understand?
No names, please. Thank you.
So as at the time the Senate president claimed that he defamed and all that, they went to court. The court gave him a lot of damages, kind of. But like I said, I don't want to go into the merits of the case because I don't know whether it was properly.
The majority of people do not have an established online medium. The majority of people who push out fake news, you don't know who they are. That is the argument.
No. For instance, every computer, for instance, has a kind of a tag to it. Once, for instance, even those the so-called people who are doing Yahoo, that's how eventually the law always gets to track them. Each computer has a particular ID to itself. When you're sending something out, it's identifiable. For instance, there is a platform to which I subscribe, Law Pavilion. At any point in time, you'll be surprised that right there from their office, they can control the laptop. I'm like, I hope I'm safe. What is this you are doing? But then that's the power of technology. So if they can, my own laptop that I cherish so much, they say, oh, after Madame, this is the next most valuable companion. If at will, they can tweak it, do another. It's the same thing. That's why you see EFCC, you understand, when they really want to work, they work. If they go to a place, no matter how much you try to hide, how much sophistication you think you have, by the time they get there, they are prepared. In a few seconds, the game is up. So contrary to what you think, if you ask those who are tech savvy, the fear of being caught is the beginning of wisdom. They are not invisible. They know that even the so-called laptop, no matter how sophisticated it is, you understand, for instance,
can be traced.
Can be traced, always. So the challenge, like I said, basically has to do with the professional bodies, and also too, there's a lot of politics in it, because this thing goes on randomly. Maybe, for instance, in my own profession, the Attorney General will be like, Sonny, go and sit down. How many people are we going to start using resources? You want me to flood the courts with all this? Who's going to prosecute and all that? But that's not the argument. One or two people are scapegoats or as guinea pigs. People will get the message very clearly, and the thing will be on the decline. But like the gentleman said here...
We're still going to talk about whether we need special courts.
Now, Mr. Arugudadi, thank you. I've known you for quite a while in the mainstream. And therefore, this has also probably caught you. I know you as a teacher, and I know that in most institutions' curriculum, fake news was not there as a course of study.
Objectivity, balance, fairness.
But now, I guess the question to ask is it fair to say that anyone can be a journalist? Because that speaks to Mr. Wunuga's issue of the definition of regulation. Because some people have told me that journalism is about the only profession left in Nigeria and possibly in many other places where you don't need any qualifications, there are no entry standards, and there's no real regulation. for them. You can't be a lawyer in Nigeria without belonging to MBA. You can't be a doctor without belonging to the NMA, and so on and so forth. But you can be a journalist necessarily without joining NUJ.
Some people say, rather than gatekeeper, you're a gate jumper. Gate crusher.
You jump over the gate.
Now,
what's your take on that?
Okay, I think that my good friend here was operating from essentially a kind of false, premise.
Definitely.
And I think at the back of his mind, he's looking at this whole issue of citizen, journalists or citizen journalism. Mm-hmm. And I did grant an interview recently where I said that the mainstream media has an obligation to combat this so-called, citizen journalism or citizen journalist. There's nothing like a citizen journalist. Now, you're a journalist for 3 reasons. 1, by virtue of being trained as a journalist. Maybe you went to the school of journalism or you read mass communication. You are a journalist because you belong to a professional or industrial association of journalists, and in which case we have the Nigerian Union of Journalists, the Nigerian Guild of Editors, and some other umbrella organizations that represent the interests of media professionals, like the Broadcasting Organization of Nigeria and the rest of them. Now, thirdly, and this is very, very important, you are a journalist because you subscribe to the code of ethics, the code of conduct of journalism. Simple. So even if you were not trained as a journalist or you didn't read mass communication, the moment you take employment as a journalist in any medium, you automatically agree to abide by the code of ethics of that profession.
What about
now
those
the code?
They are alternative journalists, not rather citizens.
Well, it's also not acceptable, really. Because journalism is about, first, being trained. What does a journalist do? A journalist processes information. It does not take raw information. It subjects information to the discipline of verification. Where there are doubts, the good journalist leaves out. The real journalist would not circulate information whose source is not sure of. So we need to mention that. And all codes of ethics of journalism, whether nationally or internationally, actually frown at dissemination of false news, which fake news will come through.
Can I stop you there to ask? I was speaking to someone at Social Media Week, a blogger, and that particular person said to me that even before social media came, you used to have newspapers with conflicting reports. Even when, there's an election, everybody has different figures. So that argument about, social media versus mainstream media, even on mainstream, you find that the reports are conflicting as well. And I was looking at the argument thinking, that's a point, but not quite.
Yeah, it's a point, really. But we're looking at, fake news here, because when you talk about conflicting information, you are talking about lack of accuracy. It's not necessarily the same thing as false news.
That might be what you call an honest mistake.
Exactly. An accident occurs. There are casualties. You've not been able to verify the number of casualties. But even at that, the standards in journalism now also says that where you are not sure, don't quote figures. There are nomenclatures you can use to capture what has happened. You could say scores have been killed, some have been killed, instead of saying 5, 6, because factual accuracy is at the root of good journalism. But looking at the traditional media, I agree with Ken that fake news has always been there. But it's not as if we in the mainstream media had always watched and allowed fake news to be. And I give the example of Lagos. There was a time when the Lagos State Council of the Nigerian Union of Journalists tried a magazine. It used to be called Akapa Stop Magazine, that concocted an interview supposedly by a girlfriend of Michael Jackson and published that interview, and it was found to be false. Now, the ethics committee of the Lagos NUJ tried the editor of that magazine. They found that it was false, and on that basis, they imposed sanctions, and that led to the end of that journal. So, one way I would agree with him is to say that for the mainstream media, the professional bodies now need to do more. But if you are looking at the sphere where fake news operates, you are looking at social media platforms, you are looking at Facebook, you are looking at WhatsApp,
Twitter.
You are looking at Twitter, you are looking at Instagram. Quite frankly, all these are beyond the sphere of professional bodies. Perhaps we can then begin to look in the direction of the regulatory bodies, because people give the impression when they talk about let us have legislation about fake news. The question you ask yourself is, are we completely helpless? We are not. He has just cited a law in Lagos State. There are civil laws. There are laws against defamation. There are laws that prohibit offensive publications and the rest of them. But more importantly, we have regulatory agencies. For crying out loud, we have the National Broadcasting Commission. So if the challenge is regulation, can we look at the scope of the work that the National Broadcasting Commission, does. They're supposed to look at broadcast content. They regulate content, and they also regulate the technical aspect of broadcasting. Now, when it comes to content regulation, we can then begin to look at if you circulate a fake YouTube, that is broadcast. If you circulate a fake audio, even online, that is broadcast.
I need to put you on pause, Mr. Arogade. Now, Dr. Barry, I know you've been listening to all of this. We're going to take a very short break at this point. When we come back, we're coming to you in our Abuja studios. Because where Mr. Arogade has reached now, and what the earlier two speakers have spoken about, has to do now with regulation. And you're a representative of government on this panel tonight. What is government doing? What is it going to do to address this concern? But that will be after the break, so please stay with us.